mass murder. He devours everything he can find on the field of international law, on how governments have come together in the past to prohibit international crimes like piracy or slavery. That they can't unite over the massacre of whole ethnic or religious groups. He said, that's crazy. He knew that even though he was presenting a radically novel international convention that would ban the mass murder of civilians, he had to do it in a way that would appeal to the self-interest of the nations that comprised the international system. The difficulty was that most governments wanted to be free to do what they wanted internally. In 1933, there was an international lawyers conference, and he thought, this is my chance. I will present at this conference my new convention banning the practice of what he then called barbarity. After his paper was read aloud, people just waved their arms and rolled their eyes and said, this crime that you, Lemkin, described takes place, quote, too seldom to legislate. Yes, it happened to the Armenians, but this is what Turks do. You know, it's what Muslims do. This is not something that Europeans would do. When Hitler invaded Poland in 1939, he did so on the heels of talking to his general staff, and as they said, well, can we get away with it? Can we get away with all of these plans you have? And Hitler said, but after all, who today still remembers the destruction of the Armenians? Lemkin knew what was coming. He warned others. When he got into the forest and was himself in hiding, he witnessed real carnage. People with whom he traveled, fled, were themselves killed, died of disease or starvation. Here is somebody who his whole life he's been reading these historical tales of deportation or mass slaughter, and he's living it. This tragedy only deepened for Lemkin when he went back to his own village, where his parents were along with his brother. He pleaded with them to join him in flight, pleaded with them to pay attention to his prophecy, to what he knew to be true. His parents said, look, Raphael, we're old. I mean, what are the Germans going to want with us? Why would they kill us? We won't have done anything to them. course, they and 47 other members of his family were herded up and sent to camps and killed. It's instinctively human when you're trapped to assume that the world will look out for you. The resiliency of that idea that Lemkin's family had, that generations of victims of mass atrocity have had, is belied again and again by the facts of history. When I graduated from college in 1992, I moved to Berlin and taught English there for about 6 months. And in Berlin at that time, there was this influx of refugees from the former Yugoslavia. They were all over the place. Camps and gymnasiums were taken over. I mean, it was really overwhelming to me, having never seen a flood of refugees before. And in the meantime, the images from Bosnia had emerged of the concentration camps. Some British journalists uncovered this horrifying footage from the former Yugoslavia of emaciated men behind barbed wire, women who'd been kept in rape camps over the course of the previous 6 months. Images that, if they weren't in color, one could easily have assumed came from a very different era. Seeing those images engendered in me a desire to face squarely what was happening, as squarely as I could within the limits of my low station in life, but to try to do something. And so I thought, well, I'd been a journalist in college, I'd been a sports reporter, therefore I should go and become a war correspondent. I ended up finding my own way over there. I was still probably 22. I was under no illusions that me showing up was somehow going to change the world, but I did have a sense that there was never going to be any other reason to do the right thing, other than that your heart kind of melted when you heard the story of what they were going through. Because it just seemed like all the geopolitical interests cut against doing. The only thing that cut in favor of doing really was caring. The hardest period was the period in the summer of 1995. We did our part, and yet in that summer, it just felt like nothing we wrote was puncturing the bubble that policymakers were in.
The hatred between all three groups, the Bosnians and the Serbs and the Croatians, is almost unbelievable, and it's centuries old. That really is a problem from hell. And the United States simply doesn't have the means to make people in that region of the world like each other.
The narrative that it was a problem from hell, that we'd never make these people like one another, that they'd been fighting for centuries, that narrative had taken potent hold. If you just say, well, they're at it again, then it's not surprising that a massacre in a village doesn't kind of leap off the page. We got word that the Serbs were closing in on this so-called UN safe area, Srebrenica. One night, got a call from the UN intelligence people telling us that the Serbs were now within striking distance of the city center. And it was like, striking distance of the city center. At that point, I reached out to my editor and said, my gosh, we've got to cover this. I mean, I was breathless. But to the editor's ear, it was just another attack. And yeah, there's more suffering, but why was this suffering different from other suffering? So I failed to convince my editor to put a story in the newspaper And the next day, when the story didn't run, was the day the Serbs just marched into the center. The UN troops kind of melted away. And Ratko Mladic, who's the leading Bosnian Serb general, but also leading war crime suspect at that time, was the person barking orders at Dutch peacekeepers who seemed very compliant.
Molim vas, budite veoma strpljivi. Samo malo. Bez panike i propustite malu djecu i žene. Nemojte da se neko dijete izgubi. Ne bojte se ništa, niko vam neće ništa uraditi.
We watched a lot of this on CNN. There was Mladic, this notorious killer who was patting the heads of young children, passing out candy. And yet, you're also seeing this historically resonant separation of individuals. He put older women to one side, attractive younger women were brought into Serb custody, and any man basically between the age of 15 and as late as early 70s was put on a bus and driven off. It was as if somehow the international community expected someone who's about to commit an act of genocide to say, "Oh, I'm about to commit an act of genocide." Surely he couldn't have executed. Why would he do that? It just seemed so. He had them. The town was his. Why would he kill every last man and boy? It was every man and boy systematically exterminated, while a group of journalists were, an hour and a half drive away, but couldn't get to them. While Western satellites were taking images and gathering intelligence overhead. I mean, all kinds of possibilities to get real-time knowledge about the fate of the men and boys. I think the thing that I found the hardest was interacting with local people who were convinced that if the outside world only knew, it would be enough to galvanize a response. But by the end of my time there, you get doors slammed in your face, and you're just saying, you're just a reminder of a world that raises our hopes and then dashes them. In the end, I felt I didn't know enough. I thought if I went to law school, maybe I could become a prosecutor at The Hague, that I could be part of the effort to punish these war criminals who had so much blood on their hands. I mean, it just was so clear as General Mladic patted the heads of these kids, he just felt completely immune, that he would never be held accountable, that he could do whatever he wanted.
Može se reći da se odmorio. Danas jedno možda 40 puta smo se spustili sa ovim momcima i bilo je pravo zadovoljstvo.
Assalamu alaikum.
Najini tiri ina tiro kirga tiro najini ba arkam tiri charo mago ota itela yesu musa tude tu bata sere jira ora turi ka tate o ka sere di imma so ardi bari baru sitan tali mina bagade ha tiro oh mo jore na tala.
Qu'est-ce qui te reste?
Juste le chargement, les manutentions, les choses, les quantités.
Ceci seulement.
Oui.
C'est vraiment de minime quantité.
Oui, c'est rien.
Inshallah تنير وخاطر نيجي عادي بس كسبون يجي أوبرا أسكر عبارة آخر كورنك أنيجي جين كيسة قدر بس كي آجي كورنك الآخر أني واجر أنيك يعني ثلاثة سنة وثمانية 10 شهور يرو 4 إلا سنتين بس إذا دار وطولي دي هرسك قداي
When you've gone through this kind of imposed criminality, you feel that you have been forsaken by everyone. I can understand. I can understand. This is why I'm giving part of myself to do probably what I didn't do for my people who died. You have to fix this kind of torn tissue.
Lemkin traveled 14,000 miles and landed in the United States in 1941. He said at one point that there were 3 things he always wanted to avoid in his life: to go bald, to wear eyeglasses, and to become a refugee. He was not at all comfortable being dependent on handouts, dependent on other people's kindnesses, asking favors of people. When he arrived in the States, the Americans were not yet in the war. President Roosevelt was inclined to stop Hitler, saw Hitler as a threat, but very reluctant to make the war into a war about saving the Jews.
You feel this guilt on your heart. You would have done much more to save them. And this is this kind of experience you live with. You cannot explain to someone. Sometimes it's even, you feel even ashamed that you didn't do anything. But actually you could not do anything because the negative forces were strong. But you never have this quietness of your spirit, of your heart. The human nature keeps on telling you you should have done much more.
The sense that he had of having failed his neighbors, failed his family, failed his community, and the idea that you could just be patient while that kind of mass slaughter was going on, that was just anathema for him. He harnessed this pain, and he put tremendous thought into what it is the U.S. government should be doing in order to stop the extermination of the Jews. What that provoked in him was this idea, maybe if I had a better word, if I'd had a better name, then, maybe then, if the crime has a name, governments will see how qualitatively and quantitatively different it is, and maybe then they'll band together to do what they should do. Lemkin's notebooks from that period forward are filled with efforts to come up with a word, a new word, to capture the crime that he'd been committed to banning his entire adult life, but in a way that would cast an instant stigma on anybody committing this crime. But in the end, what he settles on is a Greek-Latin hybrid, genos, people, tribe, race, with the Latin, sedere, side, for killing or destroying. You see it in the notebooks, him, kind of trying different things out and then settling upon this word, which he thinks can in fact connote that moral judgment that he feels is necessary. So he has a word. Now what? What do you do with a word?
Where's my wife? I lost my wife. Gertrude, where are you? Come here.
Oh yeah, that's the family picture.
That's my family when we came to America. This is a picture of some refugees.
That was about a year after we got back.
Mm-hmm. I say behind every good man there's a good woman. You know how I know that? She told me.
And it's true. I am a good woman. He doesn't know, but I know.
Oh, I stayed with her all these years,
But nobody else would have stayed with her.
Putting up with me is a full-time job.
That's true.
Really?
Not physically, just emotionally. He's a good guy.
No, she believes in what I do, otherwise she
I
wouldn't put up with it.
certainly do. I absolutely do.
I've been thinking about criminal responsibility all my life. I was raised in Hell's Kitchen in New York, which was a high-density crime area. I had decided early that I wanted to be on the side of the law. I seemed to have certain talents in that direction. In due course, I won a scholarship to the Harvard Law School, but then it was interrupted by the war. I think I was probably the worst soldier in the U.S. Army. I was rotten when it came to digging a foxhole, and I was an independent soldier, and I was trained to think. Nevertheless, I fought in every major campaign, from the beaches of Normandy to the final Battle of the Bulge. I saw war firsthand, and